All right, let's talk about Where Winds Meet, the game that looked at Assassin's Creed, Ghost, Sekiro, Genshin, and half a dozen poorly translated Chinese MMO games, and put a sprinkle of Division in there from trunk to skunk. The game is packed. It's ambitious as hell, it's earnest about its love for history, even with magic injected into it, and has enough careers, multiplayer, and single player to make it worthwhile to at least look at. Live service somehow, still being a four-letter word though. This is me, I'm ACG, and if you like the one-person band, join the tons of people leaping into the Patreon or become a YouTube member, or hell, check out the Substack, where I talk about games, behind the scenes, and the industry as a whole. This video is not 24 things you need to know, it's not 11 secrets about, it's not 7 things to watch out for, or alerting you that we need to talk. This is a video about Where Winds Meet, which is simply a live service game with multiplayer elements in a shared world. Does that mean it's bad? No. Let's dive into this, and by the end, maybe you'll have at the very least a clear picture of a game that you should have had a crystal clear understanding of since day one. If you're trying to decide how to approach this game, here's the play. Treat the solo campaign like a prestige RPG that happens to live on the internet, and the multiplayer section to the side that sometimes overlaps depending on what skills or abilities you have. Where Winds Meet is from Everstone, a developer at NetEase, and comes out on November 14th for PC and PlayStation, and 6 months later for Xbox. It's a single-player, massive title with a promise from the devs that it'll offer 150 hours of gameplay. Now, yes, I should point out they didn't say good gameplay, and due to the game's mixed nature, sprawling across a ton of activities, perhaps not 150 hours that you will like every hour of, which reminds me of the fateful time Dying Light 2 devs made the mistake of saying 500 hours of gameplay in Dying Light 2. Of course, there's the creeping fear of too much when a game says 150 hours and then shoves a buffet table of roles and raids and dungeons and tournaments, marriages, guild housing, and social minigames at you. You can almost practically hear the content treadmill creak over. The design pitch stresses that there's no mandatory progression, no clock punching nonsense, no gear score choke points, rewards for PvP and PvE stay cosmetic, so the campaign doesn't get held hostage by the loot economy. But that's not exactly true, and we're going to talk about that. The comparisons you've read are not wrong either, just incomplete. Assassin's Creed in China gets tossed around because of the historical open world and parkour, but Creed rarely lets you air dash across rivers like a silk-clad jet ski and doesn't have magic. Ghost, but with magic, captures some of the cinematic dueling energy and wind as a motif romance, but Where Winds Meet is louder about its RPG build flexibility and takes the "I'm gravity's problem" clause much more literally. Really, it's just a bit of a ton of games. It's also set in 10th century China, the 5 dynasties, and the 10 kingdoms mess, that era where history decided to try to speedrun dynasties collapsing. A third-person action RPG with you as a wandering swordsman with a mysterious past, elastic morality, plenty of opportunities to be a noble, or if you want, you can just go full Vader mode. You can just pinball through the twilight of Southern Tang, slaughtering everybody. Think palace intrigue, warring warlords, poetry with a side of doom, and then sprinkle in folklore and mythic gravity. Because this game is legally required to bend physics so that you can slaughter enemies with that super fancy fan you just bought. The devs have emphasized that there's choice and there's codes of honor and the kind of this hurts but it's right dilemmas that make you stare into the rainy middle distance like you're in a TV show before clicking whichever letter is the best translation of kill this dude right now. First, I do want to point out that Where Winds Meet seems to continue the tradition of improved character makers. Some of the footage we've seen has been excellent. Not only does it have sliders for pretty much everything, but it's also got importing a photo, so the game can add you to the national data. So that you can make sure your character looks like you. You can also record your voice so that it can be cloned onto your character. Anyway, the game's an action-adventure game, so its combat's almost exactly where you would expect as well. A mix of Black Myth and maybe Falling Feathers, as well as a little bit of Dragon's Dogma and DMC, and some Assassin's Creed. Blocks and dodges eat stamina like a friggin' Pac-Man, perfect parries slam the door on incoming combos, and you have red and gold attack colors letting you Simon Says your way through incoming enemies. Red can, of course, be deflected. Gold says dodge or die. You can equip 2 weapons and hot swap mid-combo if you want to keep your magical John Wick going on. Then whip out mystical arts. These are like teleporty jabs, energy slaps, archery shots that slow down time. Because slowing down time in the fastest kind of attack is just goddamn cool and in line with the kind of combat that the game wants to deliver. It also has 7 main weapon types right now that are all channeled in directly from the time frame. So if you want to stabby stab some pissy nomad in the face with an umbrella, you can. Swing a steel fan through the neck of an innocent merchant? Yep, you can do that. You have the sword, double sword, spear, glaive, fan, as I said before, umbrella, bow, and double flesh pumpers, or in this case, fists. And you can switch between 2 instantly or more if you leap into the inventory. Then you have your mystical arts like magic hand or still waters. So you can freeze your enemies, then slow motion shoot them in the face with an arrow. One place the developers have pointed out that they wanted to go further is that the mystical arts can also aid in traversal. So perhaps stopping water to get by a waterfall, or using grip to pull a rock down to slip across a chasm, or still waters to shoot somebody in the face in slow motion. Yeah, I said it again. I just think that's wicked. Well, exploring and story do get you many of these different unique upgrades as well. You also have dungeons, raids, and specific bosses, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. All the while moving throughout the game world, you have this large world that's pure hero fiction. And everything you would expect, your wall runs, your rooftop leaps, your water skimming sprints, and dogmatic immunity from gravity checks. You're encouraged to come at problems sideways, glide in, scale the back wall, dip through a skylight, or just wind stride across half a province, floating above all your enemies. And it's a pretty big world, so this should be easy for them to fit in. It's about 20 kilometers, supposedly, and footage and gameplay that's shown that has also shown a great deal of ground, underground, underwater, cities, and maybe a bit of the hinterlands. But honestly, 20 regions on day one, you should be able to find a new place to explore and new enemies to shoot in the face pretty easily. NPCs also in the game, some of them have a routine. They react. When you swing steel too close to them, they can duck into shelter. They can end up looking around at the game world and deciding to dive into their home if it ends up getting rainy. And sometimes they straight up intervene in fights on one side or the other. Now, you may have noticed a lot of those things are things we see in a lot of other games. However, the sheer number may not be. The developers stated that one region alone had like 10,000 individually designed NPCs. Let's just go with some PR speak for a second. 10,000 individually designed. That could mean each one saw a ton of development work. Or it means that there's tags on their metadata that says merchant, handmade, and fighter, and a developer made sure it didn't say fish just because he had spawned standing in the edge of a pond. We just won't know until we can all dive in. But they do react. We've seen examples of NPCs bring up bounties on characters that robbed them and then got caught. Also, we've seen players hunt them down. We've seen supposedly evil jailbreaks that can occur if one of your pals got thrown into jail. There is a lot that goes on in this game, and there's some flexibility and some dynamics that definitely occur. Something else that occurs is a bit of that simulation element, whether you like it or not. For example, break bones from falls or get colds if you're out in the rain and other systems. We'll see how far the simulation part goes and if it reacts to the gameplay or interrupts it, and if it rears its head more in the single player or in the MMO social side more. The main single player story is full solo, while the world around it is online. You have guild drama, optional PvP, 1v1, 3v3, 30v30, co-op dungeons with up to 5 players, and raids with 10, and weddings. Maybe that'd be like your 2v1. Actually, I never really found out if you can do a marriage de trois, but if you can, somebody's going to pull it off in this game. And the classes that you can do, they can impact both the single and the multiplayer in various ways. First, the job system deserves its own discussion. Where Winds Meet wants you to dabble in a bit of that lifetime of the moment, wherever you go. Doctor, you can brew medicine, treat illnesses born from, as I said, weather or just bad decisions. Keep your reckless friends on their feet. Despite you being able to leap from rooftops and fight in slow motion, some larger drops do break bones. And apparently, if you stay out in the cold zones too long, as I said before, you can catch a cold. Despite the fact that if that were true, everybody in the Pacific Northwest would have pneumonia for like ever. But in raids and dungeons, this could also be vital and fulfills another sort of subsection of this game, which is dungeon and raid party makeup. Moving on from there, you have social skills like the Architect, over 600 components to free-form build, from tea houses to I made a bridge here because the map designer forgot one, to Orator. You persuade, cajole, and argue people into outcomes like your inventory is full of charisma grenades, or, as we all know, somebody's going to be hawking CD codes in there. You also have Bodyguard, Ferryman, Firefighter. These all can come up and be useful outside of the main combat. For instance, in larger world events, some destructive, massive situation occurs and you'll need to put fires out, help people, rebuild houses, and, I don't know, tell people how to do it loudly with the Orator. You can also take on jobs like the Musician, so you can play music like the violinists on the Titanic as an asteroid strikes. Each have their own mini-game systems as well. For example, the Musicians have a mini rhythm game built in. The Orator has a card system for working out what works best in an argument, and the Healer has a turn-based game for checking somebody's pulse. I dig the hell out of those personally, even if I feel like after a couple hours, I can see the complaints already. As for the Bodyguard, you can hire your services out to system quests created by the game, where NPC classes who mimic those that you can choose are out there fighting and need some protection. Or maybe get good and hire yourself out to players who need a third in a battle. That's the pitch release, systems that add not only as separate actions, but sometimes multiply across the game world, something that we've seen done in Division and others. A job letting you alter terrain to open combat angles also can help you with an exploration detour, unlocking some new element or area in the game. And that's where these could be interesting. For example, 1v1, if you're going nuts and somebody falls down a cliff face and breaks a leg, it's probably going to be a very short fight. 3v3, now you got somebody who could possibly heal you. 30v30, you'd have the same thing happen, but then someone lights everybody on fire other than the firefighter, who's probably going to be immune. I want to see that. And it's not necessarily completely different than a healer being able to heal in a raid and also being able to heal when you're out and about running around. It's just that here, most of these, when you're out and about in the single player mode, well, that's just you. So you're going to have to identify with what classes you want and that help your build style. However, and you might be asking yourself this as well. If I can do these things, where do they go? Where does that fancy bridge go? Into the multiplayer world or into the single player world? Because if it's in the single player world, other people can't see it. And if it's in the MMO parts of the game, then I can't make it have an effect everywhere I want to in the main world. Well, again, that depends on the skills themselves, which with this kind of overlap is honestly exactly why I think maybe some people were confused. But overall, if you read up on this, it's not really that confusing. Most of it makes sense. Assume every class has a number of ways in which you can impact both sides. Imagine building a bridge to get from one ravine area to another in that single player game, or putting it down to help out different people in a raid, or putting out a fire in a village instead of instantly hunting down the bandits who did it in the single player, and then in the multiplayer, maybe, I don't know, helping people end up getting some immunity to fire in a dungeon. And you can imagine tons of ways that this can be done. I say imagine because we need to see how all this works. For example, promises don't always equal the reality. In fact, they rarely do equal a certain one. EVE Online launched in a form factor that doesn't really look much like it does now, and Final Fantasy Online launched like a dead body thrown out of a car with the developers wanting you to thank them that they brought a friend to your street party. It took them looking at the game and thinking, oh crap, we can actually make this good, before it was. But that's not saying that Where Winds Meet can't do better. The developers can't see those mistakes up front and say, let's not end up with the inevitable turnstile of emotional roundabout that fucking No Man's Sky or Final Fantasy or Cyberpunk have all the time, where everybody says, man, well, it's good now. And with the good and bad, though, I think we luckily do have some data about this, because in China, which got the game first in December 2024, it immediately racked up player counts that were pretty insane, millions in 4 days, and exploding from there on in player count and installs. That's awesome. But everybody should remember that that's like being surprised that an American flag folding simulator would do well in Texas. This is a game fixated on the fanciful history of a pretty historical time that also pretends that magic existed back then and that spell-punching heroes also want to build outhouses. It's a national effort in that way. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means a lot of context needs to be used to understand what's actually occurring. And when it comes to platforms, pretty straightforward. PS5 and PC day and date. Sony gets to strut around for half a year or politely excuse itself from discussing anything until it's out on every device, just depending on how good it is. On the PC version, this spreads itself across Steam and Epic and Microsoft stores. So unless your fancy 4090 hot rod PC that can quantum tunnel into torrents can't click another link, you should be able to get it on whatever store you want. While on the PS5, you're also going to get adaptions for the haptics, the adaptive triggers, the Tempest audio, and the Pro's piss filter upscaling, assuming the port's stable and the textures show up. I do understand some of the confusion here, but it also stuns me how bad the messaging has been. It's hard enough to try to track games that are a specific genre or fit nicely into a couple conventions of genres, but what a goddamn miss and just a mess in their marketing, especially for a game that looks like it has some really good ideas. So think of it like this. On the left hand, you have a single-player action-adventure game with combat that's a mix of DMC, Black Myth, and a bit of Falling Feathers. On the right hand, you have social systems, the MMO part, tons of outside activities like building, being a doctor, guild activities, dungeons, raids, and more. And then punch your hands together and hope one of your fingers isn't extended and gets jammed, because now we're going to talk about some issues. First up, reception for this has not exactly been kind when you look at the actual feedback versus just player numbers. You could assume that the early launch in China was like a beta test, nothing like your own nation being the test for the rest of the world, but there they are. First, the combat's been reported as pretty rough, not like horrible rough. Why can't this character that can water skip across pawns and do slow motion flips only to land with a massive god-sized handprint actually hit anything? But still not feeling fluid. And for a game with a great deal of combat, that can be rough. Additionally, there's been some confusion around the skills and career systems, even from people playing them, and a lot of complaints as well, and some defenses towards the various ways in which the game handles microtransactions, which we'll talk about in a second. Honestly, a combination of many desires from many systems, gameplay wants plucked from the top of top tier games in which it cribs, signals that grabbing a bit of Black Myth and DMC and Assassin's Creed and other games may not work, especially because those games already feel different in and of themselves. I absolutely love going 4x4 in the countryside, and I also love street racing. You don't see me saying both those vehicles have amazing tires. Let's put mutters on the back of that Impreza. Not only would it run like shit, it would cost a ton. Also, the PC has some high requirements, speaking of cost. AMD Ryzen 7 3700X or better, GTX 1060, well, that'll boot it, but be prepared to have an RTX 2070 or better to play it. And while 16 gigs of RAM is going to load it, recommended is 32 gigs of RAM to run this huge game world, the careers, systemic and static systems, and that one POS NPC who's still mad because you hit him with a sword when you're trying to protect him. When it comes to the PS5, it's also got some issues. It's been hammered for some frame rate plowing down to low double digits, to textures lazily filtering in whenever they want to on the previews. It's also got hammered a lot for its carpool style UI that looks like it drove through 9 different city blocks, all of different incomes to pick up passengers from everywhere. That's not carpool, that's a bus. And I don't care who you are, a bus isn't most people's definition of pretty or informative unless you like to read the graffiti and find out how many people your mom glory hold. Speaking of glory, the game also has some gloriously spread out microtransactions. It got battle passes to gotcha systems. When you do major events in the game, you get treasure chests and then open them to get the items. That's cool and it makes sense. Now, in many ways, aside from the isometric standpoint being missing, this game actually reminds me of an MMO that was called Lost Ark when it launched in the West, a full-blown mixture of systems and almost catastrophic amount of things to do and see, where at times it felt like all those things had no memory of one another, but when they did, it felt goddamned awesome. And honestly, this game looks a lot like that. Now, when it comes to the content and future, it's mapped out like a TV series schedule, I would say. 3-month beats, new regions, fresh story arcs, occasional specialized modes, and even shifts to other playable characters, supposedly. They say that like 60 to 70% of future zones are already in the making. Smart? Yes. Live service without the service is just live, and that's not a business model. We saw that with Battleborn, which died. But there's a difference between we have a plan and we stuck the landing. As pretty much any game, because most of them are out there with a Trello board that's abandoned by all the people who are developing it. However, again, the base game, free to play. It's the model that has the cosmetics, which is a little weird. You got your battle pass and your optional sub that gives some convenience fluff, with a lot of promises from the dev that no, you won't be able to swipe your way to a bigger sword swing, even though if that bigger sword is inside of a chest marked, you still got 20 minutes, bitch, you can buy and actually get through it quicker. So it's not pay to win in the official doctrine, and in the Chinese market test apparently backed up by a healthy number of people saying that it was not really filled with power creep. But there's elements there, let's not lie. You'll also notice I didn't mention the mobile version. Oh, sorry, I just didn't mention it. I have no clue what it is, but it's out there. Do I buy the no pay to win line? Look, I'm jaded, not dead. The Chinese launch reportedly did fine on pure vanity. The PS5 bundle drama is just a queue skip plus cosmetics, and the dev's documentation repeats the fairness promise. On paper, it passes the sniff test for a live service game, but it doesn't pass the sniff one for that there's not going to be any particular bonuses you'll be able to purchase later on. The red flag for a lot of these games comes in late, XP multipliers and so forth. We'll just have to see. And for all the Assassin's Creed meets Ghosts meets Sekiro mash notes, where wins meet, it slots into a bigger industry narrative, the era of Chinese mega projects trying to prove they can do global prestige and end up doing it well. Drop rate tweaks that smell like extortion? Check. The usual trench coat full of little compromises? Probably also check. At its core, I don't mind a solo/multiplayer game with some separation between the two, and I actually love it when something I do in multiplayer or single player carries over. We just have to see how all of this ends up panning out, and also, if the game doesn't take off, whether because it just doesn't hit or because people are nervous about what the future may hold, then the live service is going to be a dead one. If you like these, give it a thumbs up. I would love for you to check out the Patreon, jump in with a bunch of other people streaming games, playing out. Sound like I was going to say playing out our fantasies. Well, our fantasy is getting together and playing games, so we are there. Or check out the Substack. Leap on in, talk with me about anything you want. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.